Ha-Joon, Chang, it's a great pleasure to be here with you on the 29th of November 2010, on a cold day in Cambridge. I have to say, I came here through the snow, having made my way to the station in London through a London transport strike. And it strikes me, at some point it'll be very interesting to hear your opinions as to what is and is not right in terms of how one governs the economy, whether one should believe the claims that ever greater efficiencies are being achieved and need to be achieved, sometimes at the cost of people's jobs. I will be interested to talk to you also at this time when students are protesting. Your students are probably protesting, to hear your opinions about students. You've, of course, written the hugely successful book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. I think it's currently running at #1 of all books in Korea, and is doing extremely well in here in the UK and in the US. The reason, of course, it's doing very well is that it's one of the very few books which was ready in time for the crisis and says there was something deeply wrong about the way in which we are told that the economy works. It's an ambitious book, it's very broad, it covers every topic from immigration to finance to the role of elites to Marxist trade cycle theory. Extremely broad, extremely accessible. Ha-Joon, do you think you could start by just telling us what the real motivation for the book was?
Yes, basically the idea was to tell people how widespread this free market ideology is. I mean, even things like the knowledge economy and
very interesting,
the education and so on, which you think are kind of more kind of neutral, objective issue compared to, say, the welfare state and so on. I mean, even there, I mean, we have a lot of the influence of free market thinking, namely that everyone's driven by narrowly defined self-interest. Everyone gets what he or she deserves purely on the basis of one's own intellect and effort. And I mean, that kind of thinking is very pervasive. And I wanted to tell the reader that it's not only those more ideologically kind of debated issues like the welfare state and industrial policy and so on, but actually a lot of things that we think are relatively technical subject, that we are influenced by this free market thinking.
So it's something that I at some point I would like to come to in this conversation. This question of, in a sense, how did economics get taken over by the free market thinking to the extent that it has? And actually, I as a so let me I'll come clean about my background in this. Both my parents were Chicago economists. I was a PhD game theorist. There's a sense in which, in a sense, yes, in looking at game theory, which essentially is a kind of detailed study of market failure, it was the hope was to find a way of undermining this pervasive ideology. However, whatever the familial and psychological things, this was it. You mentioned very briefly in your chapter about economists that actually even the market failure school, even that very detailed micro school which undoes all the foundations of the free market ideology, in a sense hasn't had an impact on the overall discipline, certainly in terms of its pervasiveness in our policy thinking, etc. How do you explain the resilience of the deep market ideology?
Right. So is your mother by any chance Victoria? Yeah. No, I read the stuff when I was doing my PhD, industrial policy.
on industrial policy.
Sure. No, I mean her stuff was good. I mean, I didn't agree with it. But,
no, of course. And my father was a GATT specialist, a free trader, ideological free trader.
Yeah, no, but I mean, to begin with, neoclassical economics provides you with a certain set of tools, and depending on what factual you assume, I mean, you can actually justify anything. I mean,
I agree, but what's interesting? I mean, in a sense, I suppose the revelation of after a long time studying game theory, is that the fundamental theorem in economics is that anything is stable. Anything is stable.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, it's the sort of fundamental story is a story about the impotence of the theoretical framework. So if anything is possible, then you haven't done any work.
That's right. Yeah.
So one still has to say, if anything is possible, what has happened so that this is the particular way in which people have thought about economic relationships.
No, but let's not forget in the 1950s, 60s, and part of 70s, I mean, many neoclassical economists were in the traditional market failure approach. So the Chicago people are actually in the minority. These people that justify government intervention using standard neoclassical tools. So at that level, the tools are neutral. However, I think there's something deeper in those tools that make economics more inclined towards free market leaning than otherwise, because the assumption of hyper-rationality, the assumption of the self-seeking, I mean, those things are there even within the market failure approach. And once you build the theoretical edifice on the basis of those assumptions, it tends more towards kind of free market. I mean, it's not inevitable. I mean, if you build in enough assumptions, I mean, you don't have to draw that conclusion. But unless you really kind of put it, the default option is a free market. If you start from those assumptions.
So okay, I think I agree with you there that there's something somehow in individual decision theory which will in the end lead you to unbundle, take apart almost everything and reduce it to atomized choice. You have a section in the book, I can't remember which chapter, in which you essentially talk about you give an account of Marx's cycles, Marx's business cycle theory in terms of coordination failures.
That's right. Yeah.
Now it seems to so on the one hand you could there's a way into the economic ideology through saying hyper-rationality, but isn't there a second one which is this point about coordination, which is entirely separate in a way, because the nice thing about coordination is that it really is something that's social.
That's right.
It exists in the social realm. So do you want to just explain your view of the way in which one could read Marx's business cycle theory as a theory of coordination failure, and how that might be a way in through the market failure?
Yeah, no, actually, when you think about it, it wasn't just Marx. I mean, all kinds of sort of market failure theories are based on this problem of coordination failure. So development economists have talked about the so-called big push, which is this theory that if you want to develop modern industry, given that they are interlinked with so many other industries through demand and supply mechanisms. So, for example, if you are trying to build an auto factory in the middle of a paddy field, I mean, you don't have suppliers who will supply you with rubber tires or engines or plate glass. You don't have anyone to buy the car because the rest of the country is all the kind of poor peasant. So it's better to invest in a number of related industries together. So they, so that's another example. I mean, this is a very common kind of theme in economics. I mean, how, I mean, even assuming individual rationality, because you cannot guarantee commitment to something that you need to fully develop your potential from other actors. You need to find a mechanism to solve the problem. So, kind of capitalist enterprise is one form, central planning is another, and there are kind of many network forms of the coordination. There are industry associations. There are kind of the global kind of production chains, and so I mean this is not just Marx who talked about this problem, but I think that I mean, you have to give him the credit. I mean, he saw through this problem before other people did. So he said, look, I mean, with development of technology, the division of labor becomes denser and denser, and therefore what happens in one industry affects others more strongly. And when you do not have the kind of ex-ante coordination between these different investors, you might have over investment in certain areas and under investment in others, and this is one reason why we have this periodic crisis in capitalism, because you cannot guarantee when you make an investment that the return will be adequate, because other people have to make certain other investment before you can. So, I mean, I think this problem has been at the center of the economics, and of course, in the same way that I've just reformulated Marxian theory in the neoclassical language. I mean, you can actually see a lot of kind of common theme running through different schools of economics. I mean, they just call it differently, and they have different solutions. So I think this is where I would argue that we actually have the kind of meeting point of different schools, huh? Because that's where everyone has been, debating about. I mean, some people say this can be done through decentralized market mechanism. Others, say it, but in the end know that you need kind of omniscient being like the auctioneer of Wallacean economics. I mean, Marx says we have to do it through central planning. In reality, you have seen countries doing it through indicative planning, industrial policy, all sorts of other mechanisms.
So you put the point very nicely. You have a very nice formulation in the book, which goes something along the lines of, as capitalism developed, it became more and more necessary to plan because of the social effect of all these spillover effects, these interdependencies, and yet what the Marxists didn't realize is it was more and more complex, and therefore more and more difficult to plan. And so I suppose that leads me on to the question, which is the one thing that you say very little about in the book is the question of politics in a way, which is okay. So we're in a position in which we realize that we realize the web of interdependencies that we're in, and we realize the failures that some of these interdependencies land us in.
Yeah.
What are the mechanisms that should be the joining up mechanisms? There's a sense in which you make very strong case in the book that we should give up the idea that it's always the market that's going to be doing the joining up between all these interdependent social entities. If it's not the market, what is it?
I mean, there are different mechanisms. I mean, of course, at the other extreme is central planning, but in between, I mean, different societies have come up with different ways of dealing with this problem. So, in some countries, the government used, like in France, Japan, Korea, and so on, what was called indicative planning. So it's kind of coordination of the activities by giving people, I mean, in game theoretic terms, focal points to work around, and kind of creating common understanding, making people talk to each other so that they know others' intentions better. Of course, I mean, there's no kind of compulsion involved as in the central planning system, but there were enough kind of carrots and sticks that built into the system that activities were coordinated.
So one of the things that again at some point in the book you say, which I think is fascinating, absolutely right, is that in France the technocrats who did this were not economists. They're usually engineers or professional administrators. In Korea, where you come from and which you've written about, they were lawyers. In China they were engineers. In Japan, again, especially trained technocrats, not economists. There's a sense in so one of the things that seems to me here is indicative planning indeed is an attractive model, but it's a very technocratic model. There's a sense in which an elite cadre knows what to do, and knows what to do. What sort of relationship to the nation, to the problem that they have, to what it is that they are looking after, does that require in that group of people?
But before we get into that, I wasn't recommending just indicative planning, but there are even more kind of decentralized forms of coordination. So in some other countries, like the Sweden and so on, they work through, I mean, a combination of the very centralized industry associations or capitalist associations coordinating with very centralized unions. In the parts of Germany and Italy, they've had this, if you like, local cooperatism, if you like. So the local government cooperates with the local industry association to provide the necessary coordination. So, I mean, I want to emphasize that there are many different ways, and that exactly how you will do it will depend on your history, your politics. Now, having said that, yes, I mean the French, Japanese, the Korean model was definitely that technocratic model. Basically, the